In the spring of 1458 BC, under the blazing Egyptian sun, Pharaoh Thutmose III stood upon the sands of the desert with destiny in his eyes. Before him stretched the path to immortality, a march that would lead him and his army beyond the edges of their empire and into legend. The young pharaoh had inherited more than a throne. He had inherited a legacy of gods, warriors, and kings who had carved Egypt's name into the heart of history. Yet now that name was being challenged. Far to the north, a powerful coalition of over 300 Canaanite kings had risen in open rebellion. They were led by the city of Kadesh, once loyal but now defiant, and their goal was clear: to break free from Egypt's control. The revolt spread swiftly across the lands of the Levant, and soon the rich city of Megiddo became their stronghold. Its walls towered over the plain like a crown of stone, and within them the kings of Canaan gathered their armies, their chariots, and their courage. Thutmose knew that if Megiddo fell, Egypt's empire in Asia would crumble. For the pharaoh, this was no ordinary campaign. This was a test of destiny, and he was determined to prove that the gods had not chosen him in vain. The story of this battle would later be carved into temple walls, remembered as the first recorded war in history. The Battle of Megiddo. The campaign began in Thebes, where the pharaoh assembled his forces, divisions from Upper and Lower Egypt, chariot corps, infantry regiments, archers, and supply trains stretching for miles. Each soldier carried not just weapons, but faith in their king and in the gods who walked beside him. Among them, scribes recorded every order, every movement, every victory, so that the tale would live forever. As the army marched north along the Nile, the river glistened under the sun, feeding the fertile fields that had sustained Egypt's power for centuries. It was from this eternal rhythm of flood and harvest that the pharaoh drew his strength, the cycle of life that made Egypt the envy of the ancient world. Before this campaign, Thutmose III had not ruled alone. For years, he had lived under the shadow of the great queen Hatshepsut, his stepmother and regent. She was one of the most extraordinary rulers in Egyptian history, a woman who wore the symbols of kingship and ruled as pharaoh in her own right. Her reign had brought peace and prosperity. The capital, Thebes, flourished under her vision. Along the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari rose her magnificent mortuary temple, a wonder of symmetry and grace. Its terraces, lined with pillars and colonnades, seemed to rise from the desert like steps to heaven. Along its causeway stood rows of sphinxes, and within its walls, reliefs told stories of divine birth, trade with distant lands, and eternal harmony between the gods and Egypt. But beauty, Thutmose knew, could not guard a kingdom. Peace was fragile, and every monument of stone needed the sword to protect it. When Hatshepsut passed, Thutmose took the throne alone, young, determined, and eager to prove himself not just as a ruler of temples, but as a master of war. He wasted no time. Summoning his generals and scribes, he prepared an expedition that would remind the world that Egypt's strength had not faded. Soldiers were called from every province, from the lush delta to the farthest corners of Nubia. Each man knew his place in the divine order. 1 in 10 was bound to serve, yet many came willingly, drawn by the promise of gold, glory, and eternal remembrance. As the spring sun rose over Thebes, Thutmose's banners fluttered in the desert wind. Chariots gleamed in the morning light, horses stamped the dust, and priests performed sacred rituals to bless the campaign. Offerings were made to Amun, the god of kings, whose divine power Thutmose claimed as his own. Then, with trumpets sounding and drums echoing across the sands, Egypt's might began its march north. From the Nile Delta to the fortress of Charu on the edge of the Sinai, the army moved like a living serpent of bronze and gold, each step measured, each heart steady. Yet behind this army's strength lay centuries of struggle and rebirth. Egypt's greatness had not come easily. Long ago, foreign invaders known as the Hyksos had crossed the deserts from the east and seized the delta. They ruled for nearly a century, bringing new weapons, horses, chariots, and the art of war itself. But from the southern city of Thebes rose defiance. The pharaohs of the 17th dynasty swore vengeance. Inscriptions from that era speak of kings who promised to cut down the trees and drink the wine of the lands they would reclaim. And they did. The Hyksos were driven out, their cities burned, their rule shattered. Egypt was reborn, stronger, prouder, and more determined never to bow again. Thutmose III was the heir to that vengeance, the living embodiment of Egypt's unbreakable spirit. His heart burned with the same fire that had once united the two lands under the first pharaoh, Narmer, whose victory over his enemies was immortalized on the Narmer palette, a symbol of power and unity that every king since had sought to emulate. Now, it was Thutmose's turn to carve his mark into eternity. By the time his army reached the border fortress of Charu, it had swelled to over 10,000 men. Behind them lay Egypt's temples, its gods, and its people. Before them stretched the unknown lands of Canaan, filled with enemies and ambition. The road ahead would lead them through deserts and mountains, through blood and glory, to the gates of Megiddo itself. And as the pharaoh looked toward that horizon, he knew that what awaited him there would define his name forever. This is the story of the first great battle ever recorded in history. A story of courage, strategy, betrayal, and triumph. And today, we at Histrology Hub bring it to life, the saga of Thutmose III and the Battle of Megiddo, where the sands of time still whisper the clash of chariots and the cry of victory.